have a quorum.
All right, call to order and announce a quorum is present. And a quorum is present, yes? All right. And it 6:01. How about that? All right, let's go. Discussion items of mayor, council, city administrator reports. Presentation by John Land with North Shore Solutions regarding the housing market study. John Land?
Thank you.
This is your meeting, evidently, buddy.
Well, thank you all for having me. My name is John Land, as mentioned. Moved to Scroggins from Frisco, Texas in 2014. My daughter graduated from Mount Vernon High in 2015. Was married at M.L. Edwards, and rehearsal dinner was over at the Chop House. So we've tried to frequent Mount Vernon about as much as we could. I spent most of my career in economic development. I recruited, retained, or extended over 2.2 million square feet of real estate, and was named the Dallas-Fort Worth Top 5 Deal Maker by the Dallas Business Journal. I retired as a city administrator in 2022 and formed North Shore Solutions. I served as a company's CEOG. People ask, well, what is that? You know what a CEO is? You know what an OG is? So it's kind of a combination of CEO and OG. So North Shore is a development and public administration consulting firm specializing in public-private partnerships. Through mutual networks, I was able to meet Craig Linville. I had previously worked with Stan Lowry, the city attorney, over my career, and eventually was introduced to Bob. We discussed the goals of the strategic plan, and I quickly enlisted Catalyst Commercial to help with that, and the rest is history. Before we get started with the plan, I want to commend Craig for his enthusiasm, professionalism, responsiveness. Throughout this project, he was always available to meet Johnny on the spot. He got us every bit of information we needed. As we were going out and calling other communities, he was able to help us with some of that information. So I just want to thank you for that. Without that, this would be a very, very different setting. So thank you, Craig, for your efforts.
Thanks, John.
The 2023 strategic plan discussed the need to assure that there were housing types that serve working professionals and retirees with a focus on owner-occupied housing. The strategic plan also noted the lack of existing housing and the starter home price range was identified from $180,000 to $250,000. The specific goal highlighted in the strategic plan was to ensure that there's sufficient housing for this community. Under that goal were 4 objectives: to create environments that allow for a variety of housing. Oh, there we go. Is that better? All right. I know sometimes my voice is loud, but this is probably even better. To create environments that allow for a variety of housing to be developed, to ensure housing types are compatible with current and future land uses, to create opportunities that occur aging in place, and to promote home ownership. Lastly, the strategic plan recommended an analysis be conducted to understand growth projections in housing types. To assist with this process, Catalyst Commercial was contracted to examine the capacity by annual demand and income, to support their strategic recommendations, and to explore market-oriented housing opportunities. At this point, I'm going to turn the floor over to Chris Brandon with Catalyst, who's going to tell you a little bit about himself and then walk you through the findings. Chris normally gets applause when he speaks. I don't know. He wrote that into my script.
Whatever. Anyways. Well, good evening. Thank you for having me. We do quite a bit of work with John in his previous positions as city manager in DFW, but we're based in Dallas. My name is Chris Branham. I've worked with Catalyst since 2010. Jason Clonch and I kind of are the face of Catalyst and lead most of these projects. So, like John said, following the strategic plan, doing kind of a high-level assessment of your housing condition, your housing inventory here in Mount Vernon was important. So this is kind of the process that we did that through. Some of you were in some of that initial stakeholder engagement. Mark, you were in there, if you remember, back in October. And then we started going through data analysis, looking at growth projections. We looked at economic activity, industrial expansion, not only here, but out in the county, in Sulphur Springs, in Mount Pleasant, and some of the surrounding areas to understand, right now, Mount Vernon, the town itself, the town itself isn't expected to grow a whole lot right now, right? Growth projections are fairly steady growth, but not super fast, not in the way of DFW, but it is coming out this way, right? So looking at how much of that economic activity, how much of those new jobs can you capture here in Mount Vernon, and based on those incomes of those new jobs, what can they afford as far as housing, and what would that housing look like? So kind of give you an idea of where we're at in this point in kind of an economic cycle, right? Everything's changing. Post COVID, that was kind of a Great Recession was kind of a big before and after. COVID was kind of a big before and after. Cultural changes. People look at how they use their houses different. They look at it differently when we've got things like remote work. Kind of changes the landscape of how people work, how people use offices, how people choose where to live, right? There's kind of a growing preference for renting, and obviously in a city like this, one of the things the strategic plan was to promote homeownership. That growth, to some degree, is fueled by cost of housing. People are purchasing homes later in life. The median age of first-time homebuyer now is over 38 years old. So people are renting up until then, right? So, renting versus owning is generally kind of a lifestyle choice, but that's changing a little bit. Fluctuating material and financing costs. These costs are obviously passed on to buyers. And then there's the flight to suburban and kind of rural or ex-urban cities where, people are less beholden to where their job is located, with some of whether it's a hybrid schedule or whether it's a fully remote schedule. That's kind of fueled some of this. I'm sure you guys, from what we had heard, like late 2020 through 21, we'd heard there were quite a few people moving to Mount Vernon from places that you wouldn't normally think would be moving here, right? I think one of your council members did from the West Coast, but that flight has kind of fueled some of this drive or demand for housing, and it's affecting inventory, right? Because as these people move in, the housing market is less responsive to it's a longer cycle, it's less responsive than kind of cultural changes. So from a low of basically a 30-year rate of 265 in January of 21, and grew to 779 in October of 23, and it's kind of leveled off, and we're right below 7 right now, but this is kind of the new normal, right? And the inventory is kind of artificially suppressed or depressed because there's quite a few people with very cheap mortgages, right? With very cheap money. I think the last stat that I'd heard was between 30 and 35% of people have a rate below 4%, and that plays into if you're wanting to move, your family's growing. It's a hard decision to make, to give up a 265 or 275 mortgage and jump feet first into a 7%. It gets quite a bit more expensive for a house that really may not be a whole lot more expensive. And I think this is open forum, right? So if anybody needs to stop me or have a question, let me know. I'm trying to advance here and it's not doing anything. Thank you. So, looking at where Mount Vernon is right now, it's kind of a lack of housing choice. We had heard over and over that the existing inventory is just not enough for what the demand is in Mount Vernon. We had heard from the school district that quite a bit of their staff and teachers commute in, and through their kind of anecdotal talks, they had told us that a lot of those people would like to live in Mount Vernon. There's nothing available, right? So, yes, sir.
On the previous chart, you used the income of $60,000 a year.
That may be an old.
I just didn't
Let's
know
see.
if this was based on some of your analysis, if that was an average income for a two-person
Yeah, I think
year, or
I think your median incomes are like 58.9, 58.5, something like that in Mount Vernon
per capita, per household.
per household. Yeah.
So, okay, so that's what, I'm just trying to, as you're going through this.
Yeah, and I think that slide may be later now. I sent a revised version, but
Just wondering what price home we would be looking at, in the context of this, as you're talking about housing.
I think it's. Let me see if it's a little bit later here, but this is working now. Let's see. It's not in here, but basically what I did was took that $60,000 and assumed that you're going to put down 20% and then use 30% of gross income at whatever rate it is over time to look at affordability of a $60,000 income. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What was the median price of the house that we're looking at building?
As far as
I don't know
looking
if
at
that's his question, but on $60,000 a year, what's the price house that's affordable for that couple?
let's see. I think it's
more your question.
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And that's assuming again 20% down and
Correct.
30% of gross.
Okay.
Sorry, I moved that. I think I sent a version of the PowerPoint and then updated it, but
And just to your, I think one of the things that made you bear out the study, that we talked about the need for kind of attainable housing at 180 to 250, but there also seems to be kind of a pent-up demand for people that want to move up in a house. Maybe they're moving out of a house that's in that price range.
I would agree.
So
It's a
there
small
may
town,
be an
you've got the whole
opportunity.
mix.
We talked about kind of aging in place. One of the phenomenal things that we found about Mount Vernon is when we did a study into this year, they're very intentional. They want to be. It wasn't. There was not any other options. It was people chose to come here, and you saw even more of a kind of a desire for a community like this during the pandemic, when everybody was on top of each other. Like we were in Frisco, and we kind of felt it before the pandemic, and we wanted to get out of that. We wanted to raise our daughter in a little different environment. We were very particular about spiritual formation,
Hey, John.
intentional spiritual formation, which is an environment. So we decided.
maybe not.
It'd be better if I just went to the mic. Would that be easier?
No, you can hear. You can hear.
Okay. All right. Thank you. But anyway, we were very concerned about unintentional spiritual formation, which was the environment your kids would be raised in. And we wanted to move out here, and we wanted to be in what we considered what we were raised in, with normal folks. And so I think when you find the folks that live here, they don't want to leave. Some folks would like a little better housing opportunity, but they don't want to have to leave to get it. And there's other people, teachers, they are having to commute to come here. And at some point, it's getting to be further and further away. And there's got to be an option for firefighters and police and teachers to move into a house where a $60,000 salary will get you something that's somewhat newer. So I think I don't want to jump to all the conclusions, but I think part of what you're going to see is there's definitely a need for that 180 to 250 housing, but there's also a need for a little better house too, for some folks that are here to move up into a little nicer home.
Right, and that move up housing, like John said, just doesn't exist here. You might turn that off. I don't know if it's feedback, but there you go.
Remind me to turn it on if I start talking.
I think there's a lot of talk, kind of in general in the nation, about housing affordability and building affordable housing. I think sometimes that can be, it means a lot of different things to different people, but I think a lot of times it ends up meaning just somebody else is subsidizing it or paying for it. And I think that in cities like Mount Vernon that have kind of a wide range of years that the housing was built, like I think like 12% of Mount Vernon was built in 1930s or before. So there's quite a wide range of vintages, if you will, and that kind of aging housing stock is your kind of de facto affordable housing. It's housing that's located, already with utilities within or nearby downtown, and it's opportunity for, either redevelopment or remodeling. And I'll get to that here in a little bit, but, like I said earlier, strong rental demand. There's concern about rental concentration, and some of that's brought on by low inventory, that people have no options, so they end up renting because there's nothing that they can find that they can buy. And because there's none of that move-up housing within the city or within the town, a lot of that new construction goes out into the county because there's just no options within the town, within the limits. But that also reduces the opportunity for the city to capture that property tax within the city coffers.
Was that a question that you asked doing the survey? Like, if you had a choice to rent or own, which one would you do?
We did not do a citizen survey.
Okay.
That wasn't part of it.
I wasn't sure how broad the scope was.
But as far as kind of propensity to rent or own, that's something that is tracked by the census and does go into the way we calculated housing demand. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But overall, some things that are positive for Mount Vernon are low cost of living, relative to some of the areas around here or relative to DFW, and high quality school district. You've got an excellent downtown. It's changed quite a bit from what I understand, and that all that plays into places that people want to live, amenities that people want to live by, when they don't want to live in just a kind of a cookie cutter town that most of North Dallas County and Collin County is. People enjoy those kinds of places, right? So looking at kind of briefly a cycle of neighborhood health, and this is played out quite a bit in Mount Vernon, where the neighborhood's developed, it starts appreciating, it kind of stabilizes, there's quite a bit of home ownership or owner-occupied housing, and it starts to age, things, maintenance issues start to pop up, people get complacent, neighborhood starts to decline, and then it gets back into the cycle of renewal, back into development. But understanding kind of where some of your pockets of issues are and tracking those kind of neighborhood health factors is important, for the city to kind of tackle those issues before they become a really big issue. Advance, please. It's thank you. Again, this got out of order for some reason. Low population growth in Mount Vernon, like I said earlier, but you have a younger population. I think Mount Vernon is 6.5 years younger median age than the surrounding county, which is not normal. That's quite a big difference, and some of that may be due to housing price out in the county versus within the town. But median income is expected to grow. Average household income is also expected to grow. So this is kind of what John was talking about earlier. They call these psychographics. It's kind of a way to segment the population into light buckets of people that are alike. If you were CC's Pizza, you're gonna go your kind of profile you're looking for are young families with 2-3 kids that that they householders are 35 years old, etc. That's you kind of build a profile of what your customer looks like. And in the same way that Esri, which is a big data provider, demographic provider, they kind of split the United States up into 67 buckets called tapestry segments. And Small Town Sincerity was, it's kind of a cheesy name, but that was kind of the dominant type of people that live here in Mount Vernon, but young families that are kind of invested in the community. You know, it's a place they really choose to live. It's kind of an intentional place to live, kind of outside those metropolitan areas, but they're community-oriented, family-oriented, and it's the people that want to live here and the people that want to move here. And this presentation is like a very high-level version of the housing study or housing assessment, and that can be shared with anybody here if you need it. Either get with me or get with Craig. But looking at existing housing, so looking at kind of permits issued from 2000 forward, that big spike you see in 2003 is it Logan's Point? Is the name, the multi to the south there. But you know, as expected, most of your housing stock is single family detached. You know, a good bit that would fall within that quote unquote affordable range. Almost 12% that was built 1930s or earlier. And I think I would imagine that's probably to some degree because of the way that the town handles some of those with the signs and everything. It's kind of a heritage thing, right? And but majority owner occupied, probably close to 10% lower than kind of national average for owner versus renter, and that's a concern for the city. I would imagine that most people here have rented at one point in their life, but you know, as you get older and as you're into some of these neighborhoods, you know, there's definitely an argument that you know, owner occupancy adds to stability of neighborhoods, and it's certainly not always true, but I do think it's somewhat true. Again, this is you know, looking at your housing inventory within the city across different product types. Maybe better than some cities of the size or some kind of suburban cities. You guys have a decent range in the middle there usually, especially with new development or cities that are a lot newer. You're either single family detached, 4.5, 5 units an acre, or it's 25 units an acre, large islands of multi. So we were looking at, you know, what's going on, what's kind of coming down the pipe for potential housing. I'll go to the second two first, but that Miller Street behind Logan's Point, a little bit of single-family detached and then some duplex. The Oaks to the south, it's kind of a amenitized tiny home park, RV park. And then the town mixed use, because there's not really a name for it yet, but just kind of that traditional neighborhood development mixed use project that that's kind of slated or thought of to be planned in that area. Not sure yet unit counts, but there's potential for that the town's exploring. This map came across goofy. It's supposed to have some counties highlighted, but looking at housing demand, you know, generally it's calculated on population growth and decline, changing demographics and preferences. If people are changing over from being an owner to a renter or a renter to an owner, growing, you know, or declining sectors of age. You know, if you're 65 plus, you're probably going to you know, have a different view or different wants for your housing than you are if you're, mid-30s and have a family. You're going to be looking for something maybe lower maintenance, maybe a little bit smaller lot. And then the big part of this, because Mount Vernon isn't growing a whole lot, kind of from demographic or census perspective, we looked at what's going on kind of in industrial jobs, economic activity in Sulphur Springs and in Mount Pleasant, and how much of that can Mount Vernon capture. Because I think the idea is that, some of these jobs, some of that activity is happening outside of Mount Vernon, but Mount Vernon wants to be kind of that bedroom community that, people, the school district is the most desirable in the area. People want to live here. That you would go work elsewhere and come back to your nice neighborhood here in Mount Vernon. So, did you have anything more on that, John?
Let me turn my microphone on. Yeah, I mean, we either visited with or met with in person Sulphur Springs Economic Development Corporation, Mount Pleasant Economic Development Corporation, City of Pittsburgh. We talked about what's going on here, and there's job growth in this whole area. We think there's a real opportunity for some of the higher paying jobs. They're going to gravitate towards school districts and amenities and accessibility. And you can get anywhere. You can get to either one of those communities in 20 or 30 minutes pretty darn easily. And there's a lot of good things here. So we think when we were looking at that mix, initially you kind of start off with a hypothesis. How do you think this is going to end? And we kind of I think the strategic plan kind of talked about, you really kind of need that $180,000 to $250,000 house range. And we were kind of thinking, well, that's probably what the study's going to say. But there seems to be a pent-up demand for that next level of house too, from both folks that live here, but from some of the job growth. You start looking at some of the incomes that some of these jobs are going to command and the volume of some of those jobs being created, those folks are going to have options about where they live, and they're going to want a certain type of house in a certain type of neighborhood. So we really think there's a real chance for this to be a bedroom community to some of the job growth that you're seeing in some of these surrounding communities, including your own.
Thank you. All right, so now we get into housing demand. So, like I'd said, it was calculated based on that job growth and then demographic changes. But there's a decent amount of kind of below market. It's not really super feasible to build under 200,000 right now for single family. But there is some demand for that, and this demand doesn't necessarily mean that Mount Vernon is going to have to satisfy that demand. It's just looking at what does that demand look like based on those factors. But 70 units annually, basically of all owner-occupied types. There's a lot of demand, and I realize that. Historically, looking at building permit activity, there hasn't been near that. There's spikes with big multi projects, but the demand is there. Again, half that demand is 150,000 to 250,000, but there is a good bit in that above 250,000, and that's also. When that stuff gets built, those people move up and vacate units below them, vacate their previous unit, which then becomes, available for somebody else. And then looking at, multifamily demand or renter-occupied demand, which would include multifamily, but also, some other alternative duplex, single-family build-to-rent, other types that kind of fall into that renter-occupied. But this one, we ended up with 59 units annually of rental product. Half that demand is for rents below $750. That has to do with kind of the propensity to rent based on your income, and some of that rental choice is on the lower end of incomes. Either younger, married, or single, just starting their career. And then, 1,000 and below is generally below market right now. That would be fairly tough to build right now. So then we got into recommendations, and we kind of nested all these below the strategic plan objectives that were laid out. First one, creating environments that allow for a variety of housing types. You're updating your zoning code right now. You're updating your FLUP, your future land use plan, and that's a big step forward. It was, what year was it that it was last updated? It was the 70s, right? Yeah. So I mean, things have changed a little bit since the 70s, I think. Especially with housing choice, housing types, people's preferences. So you're on a path with zoning. It's important. And then another recommendation that I kind of talked about was looking at creating kind of it could just be an internal kind of dashboard or tracker of some of those neighborhood health factors that when issues arise, the city can kind of attack those before they become a huge issue. To ensure housing types are compatible with current and future land uses, some of this is to do with your zoning and your future land use plan, but I think a good idea is to have some sort of housing committee, whether that's staff-led or whether that's citizen-led. There's a number of ways you could do it, but just people that are interested in housing that can keep kind of a pulse on what's going on, and your zoning generally should be kind of eventually a living document, or your future land use plan should at least be a living document, and making recommendations at some sort of interval on hey, our our high density residential future land use place type is just way out of whack with market. It's for example, but we need to probably adjust that. Making recommendations or exploring some ideas related to housing. Another idea that we've seen work in other areas is surveying employers, existing employers, or future employers that are planning on choosing Mount Vernon as their next site, but surveying them to understand, what kind of housing do their employees look for? What are they wanting? What are the incomes? What kind of jobs are coming in? Are they hiring local? Are they moving people here? Just kind of a number of answers that you would get from surveying them to understand how you as a city can kind of facilitate housing for those new jobs. Another objective in your strategic plan was to encourage aging in place. I think encouraging a variety of housing types is important. Like I said earlier, as you go through your different life stages, your choice of housing could change. In a lot of areas, people are stuck with one housing type, and they don't have the option to go to kind of a lower maintenance or lower intensity housing. But just allowing that in obviously within context of the existing neighborhoods, and that's sensitive to the existing neighborhoods. But and then accessibility was another one that was talked about in there, about remodeling or updating some of these homes. The city of Plano does a really good job with this, with some of their programs that the city does, kind of low interest or zero interest loans to people that qualify, or whether they're a senior or whether they make a certain amount of money to make accessibility or handicap upgrades to their houses, or make facade improvements, or repaint or replace a broken deck, things like that the city is eventually going to to make that money back in property taxes. Do you want to talk about your demo rebuild in Farmers Branch? It's probably one of the more successful housing programs that.
You know, I worked for the city of Farmers Branch for 20 years. And one of the things we found is most of our houses were built in the 50s and 60s, but they were on nice lots, big trees. That's hard to find. And the houses were, most of them were post-World War II, tract homes, weren't necessarily constructed all that well. But we had a desirable location, we had a great park system, good schools, and we started an incentive for folks to tear their house down. We basically paid them to tear their house down and build a new one in its place, and we would freeze their taxes at the previous amount. So if you had a house that was $180,000 and it was not in great shape, it cost $6,000 to tear it down, the city would give you $6,000 and they would only tax you at that 180. Then you'd go out and you build a new house on that same footprint. And we did over 100 of those over, I don't know, a little over 10 years or so. And it was, and the other thing the city
Still
did,
going quite a bit. I mean,
yeah,
One
it
of the
was.
challenges to doing that I found here was to get everybody, what I was told was to get everybody to agree to the tax.
Yeah.
You got the county, you got the school, you got the city.
And so
How do you get all
the
three
school
of them
district didn't agree to it, county didn't agree to it, so we froze city taxes. What we could levy, we froze.
it's an amount. It's not as big as if it was all of those entities.
Well, I
but-
mean, it's just something.
Yeah,
Right.
and it's, you know, it's
Right.
one of those things. Was it the final decision for someone to do it? It wasn't always, but it was a creative program, and it got people thinking. And then you'd go and look, where else can I find a lot like this? Where else is there going to be a park system like this? Or where, you know, and a lot of the folks, you know, they lived in that house. A lot of times it was their parents' house. Their parents moved into independent living. They took their folks' house in. But they like, we've got a growing family, we've got kids, and this house was built in the 50s and 60s, and it's not modern, and it's low ceilings and old appliances. And, you know, at the time, the interest rates were lower, too, so the barrier to entry was but when you started kind of talking about it, and they said, the city really wants us to do this. They're willing to say, hey, we'll cap you here. And we did it for, depends on the type of house you put back. We did it for 5 years, 7 years, or 10 years, depending on what you put back in its place.
So, have you had any experience doing that in like a historic district? I think most of our older homes are going to be in the historic district.
You know, in those, maybe there's a home improvement incentive. Because if you have a historic district, those are hard to replace, and a lot of those houses are actually in really good shape. They just need some TLC. So that might be an incentive program to maybe reinvest in a historic district. And maybe if it's another part of the town, maybe there's an incentive to, you know, tear it down and rebuild it. But I would say a historic district is pretty charming, and that attracts a certain type of person that wants to live in a house like that. And what you don't want to have is, I say this, you have a historic district, and then somebody comes in and tears down one of the historic homes and builds something new, and it's kind of out of context with the neighborhood, and you start gentrifying that, and you start losing a little bit of the charm.
Yeah.
work however you want it to. I mean,
Yeah.
really, I mean, it's
But
your.
what's some of the things you've seen?
I
give you an example.
Yeah.
One of the things that this city decided was a great idea about 15 years ago was charge $500 for a water heater to be replaced because they were doing it in Dallas. And I know it's just one instance, but it's like, that's stupid. Why would we do that? Well, the plumber's going to go, hey, that's a great idea. You know, or the city or somebody on the committee is going to go, oh, that's a great idea, when it's not. So how do you balance
Yeah.
that?
Well,
those
To the point of a housing commission, I think as Craig mentioned, you get stakeholders and you have to kind of rely on people who are experts. You have a real estate agent, you have someone who would lend. You know, does this make financial sense to someone? I would suggest the school district, they're your largest employer. And so they're gonna say, hey, we have teachers and this is what teachers are wanting and we wanna weigh in on that. You know, committees can be fantastic and they can be wheels off, and a lot of that comes down to who you know, being mature with how you appoint folks. And just realizing up front, here's what a profile of a committee member is, and it is someone that understands construction, someone that's in materials, someone that's a real estate agent or a lender or this large employer. And just before you start, let's see what success looks like, and here's what a committee should look like to represent this particular topic. And just, you know, you got to get that part right. It's like hiring folks. You have to hire, but you can't train. You've got to get that part right, and just kind of trust the process. And it's not always perfect, but the only thing that makes it work are people. You know,
Yeah,
if it's just a handful of folks, it's never going to work. You have to have ownership from your whole community.
Yeah, I think I would probably initially at least stay away from any sort of like regulatory power with some sort of committee, but have them basically just be giving ideas, suggesting policy that the city can, ultimately it's council's decision, right? That, you know, whether the city implements XYZ idea, you know, but it's getting a group that's vested, like you said, John, like vested in housing, invested in, you know, has an interest in doing the right thing for housing as it relates to Mount Vernon, and, you know, making those kind of decisions that council may or may not be thinking of. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
All right, last slide. I know some of you are not on the clock, so again, promoting ownership. John already talked about the demo rebuild program, but you know, all these things kind of go into increasing the quality of the existing housing stock. You know, continuing your investments in your amenities that make it a special place to live that people want to move to. Downtown, your park system, your schools, all the things that people think about, and that people are thinking about more so in recent years. You talked about infill earlier. You know, streamlining some of these infill development approvals, and again, this is a very high level assessment, so some of these have not been, you know, fully vetted. I did not go through and talk to all their permitting people and, you know, understand the full process, but it is an issue that we've seen in other cities. But you know, the another thing that the kind of committee and the housing dashboard or the housing tracker can do, that I think that should track is, you know, infill lots that are available that have either city owned that the city's willing to sell, or that privately owned with a willing seller. You know, for people to kind of understand, you know, what is for sale, what is potentially available, and just the city being kind of a facilitator of that development. And you know, you could even get to a point where you kind of have a master developer program where the city can package 5 to 10 infill lots together and give somebody a little bit of scale for when they come in, to make it a little more enticing for them. And then lastly, encouraging mixed use development. There's been a lot of talk about kind of the traditional neighborhood development, which you know, I think traditional neighborhood development, especially on this, you know, city piece, is it's essentially mixed use, right? Like, we did not originally develop neighborhoods in kind of the way that we build them now. And those places have become extremely desirable and extremely expensive because they're so desirable and because the inventory is so low of them. But encouraging that mixed use development and kind of those amenitized developments, master plan developments that have those amenities where people want to live. And that is all I have. Glad to stick around and answer any questions anybody has. Like I said, the full study, Craig can send it out if you contact him. I'll leave some cards as well.
The great take, there's a number of takeaways here, but I think one of the biggest takeaways
from being kind of anecdotal, like, you know, there's a lot of rental pressure, or, you know, I can't find anything to buy in Mount Vernon. It goes from that to some sort of like actual formal, uninterested third party saying, you know, this is the demand. This is based on, you know, real data.
So John, you mind stepping up to that microphone? I don't like this crap. Yeah. So just so everybody remembers, I don't know if you remember from an EDC standpoint, John is a consultant that we actually approved the pay for to have him do this. My question to you, John, just because I've never met you before or anything else, one, so you've helped us with this study.
Mm-hmm.
Is that all we're doing with you? Is just the study on the housing? Or are you are going to be involved in any kind of some of these action items type stuff?
That's up to you. Our charge was this study. So this was the deliverable that we had in this part of the agreement.
All right, well, I will tell you, just to give you a little bit of my background.
Yes, sir.
We moved from the Lovejoy School District.
Okay.
We used to kick y'all's butt in all kinds of sports, with the exception of swimming, which my daughter was, so that's the one that I'm kind of irritated with you Frisco people about. But anyway, but we moved here about 5 years ago, permanently, 6 years ago now, I guess. And, you know, I drive around the town and I wonder, from an action standpoint, I don't know where we have property. Where do we? Let me give you a little bit of background. So about 3 years ago, we asked Jason McCullough, Dr. McCullough, our superintendent, to do kind of an informal study. And you're correct. The education system here is our biggest employer. We had him do an informal study of just going around and asking teachers, where do they live, and if there was housing here in Mount Vernon, would they live here if they didn't live here? Well, he found nearly 90 of our teachers live outside of our school district. And a large portion of those, some of them obviously had to live where they lived because their husbands had other jobs or whatever the case may be. But the majority of them said, I would absolutely live in Mount Vernon if there was availability of housing. So how do I provide that housing, and where do I provide that housing? What's my action item to provide that housing? All of this stuff is great, and that's crap. You know, I mean, we can do, but where do we do it? How do we do it? What do we do? So, you know yourself, we've been Industrial Foundation, and we set these goals every year. We set these goals every year in Industrial Foundation. You know what the number one goal that we set is? Housing. Well, I'm tired of talking about it, and I'm tired of hiring consultants about it. I want action items. How do we do it? Where do we go? How do we do it? And how do we make this happen? I'm tired of talking about it, is what I'm trying to tell you.
Well, it sounds like this is a job offer. I'm taking it under advisement. I will tell you, I've spent an entire career getting things done.
Well, this is my EDC board.
Yeah.
And so if you want to sell yourself on a job offer, they're the ones that'll approve financing for that job offer.
When we talked about this, one of the things I mentioned to Craig is I'm not the study guy. I'm the get it done guy. And when we talked about it, Craig goes, hey, you're known around here. You know, people know your reputation. We'd really want you to be involved in the project. And I said, I'm gonna hire experts. I've hired this firm at least 7 times over my career.
It's 2011.
Yeah, yeah,
It's been a while.
yeah. Started, everything they did was spot on, and it gave us the confidence to move forward and get things done. And this is the group that gives you data that's actionable and it's sourceable. And when you go and say, hey, we have a plan that says we have this pent-up demand and here's a variety of housing types, somebody's going to say, that sounds great, prove it. You can prove it. What typically what I do is make things happen. You know, I mentioned when I introduced myself, I was a top 5 deal maker in Dallas-Fort Worth. This was in Farmers Branch, Texas. Dallas was number 1, Fort Worth was number 2, Arlington was number 3, and the Dallas Regional Chamber was number 4. I was number 5, not Frisco, not Irving, not Plano, not McKinney, not Allen, not all of these other large cities in Dallas-Fort Worth. It was our office, and at the time it was me. Now we grew our office over time, but what I do is I pride myself in getting things done. And I think you've got a great story here. If we can, we've got our study back up, or you had talked about, wrong one.
You've done the study.
Yeah.
And you've come from there like I have and come to here, just off the top of your head. So I don't know that this city, you can attest to this one way or the other. I don't know that the city has the financing to do some of the neat things you were able to do in Farmers Branch. So I don't know that that's really on the table here.
Yep.
Do we have that kind of a budget?
Well, have you've seen the deal, the rough plan for that town mixed use, haven't you?
Yes, yeah.
Well, along the lines of what's next, I think we gotta put a calculator to infrastructure. We've gotta look at what the streets are gonna run, what the sewer's gonna run. I mean, we've gotta get all that run. I know it comes back to you, but you have to front the money up front. And so,
And let's
we have a
readily
park in this thing. I mean, there's all kinds
let's
of stuff
readily
in here.
admit though, some of our financing is coming from grants.
Sure it is.
I mean, and I don't
That's
know of
everywhere,
any.
though.
Is
That's
there
a
any
lot
kind of
of-
grants that?
Yeah. Well, and there's a tool
Housing?
called a public improvement district, that it's basically, it's issued on the full faith and credit of the city, but it is a infrastructure bond essentially, and it is paid for by the developer. So the developer is going to say, there's $10 million worth of infrastructure. We're going to have to put in streets, water, sewer, curb, gutter, sidewalks, amenities, whatever, and say it's a large dollar amount. Say it's $20 million bucks. Well, for them to get a construction loan, it's going to be that and building and doing all the lot work and everything. A PID bond, typically the interest rate is considerably less than what a construction loan is because of the participation with the city. That's paid, that is an assessment on that property, and then as that different units are built, it's assessed back to whoever owns that. So eventually, perhaps the property owner pays it, perhaps the HOA pays it back, but it's a tool to front the money without the city having to do it, but it's a tool the city has to incentivize a developer to do that because of the lower interest rate and the immediacy of the funds. So there's a tool there that doesn't cost you anything.
We're working
That's
on
the
that.
process.
That's
Yeah.
the next step.
That's what we've explained, that is the next step in the
Yeah.
process, but we needed the market study to show we had.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And John and I and Stan have already talked about, having, a public improvement district. And I think that's the next conversation that we have, and John can be very helpful on that. Another thing that John can be helpful on, is that he knows developers.
Well, I think one key to what he said, at least for me, is as we do this, there's gonna be people outside moving in, but there will be people moving from other regions into some of these. I'd like to have the plan of how we're going to, what we're gonna do with the vacated homes as things move around. Because that's part of, I like that they brought that up. It's part of it that, okay, we begin coming up with a plan to revitalize some of this as well.
And I think that housing commission would be very instrumental in that too, to kind of start thinking through, hey, how do we promote this if there's going to be a new neighborhood? Like, that's a very attractive piece of real estate, right? It backs up all the way to the school district. So if you're talking about teachers, what a great place to live is a brand new neighborhood you know, with a variety of housing types in it that backs up to the school district. Then you also have highway frontage. So you have incredible accessibility. So if you live in, if you're working in Mount Pleasant or Sulphur Springs or Pittsburgh, man, you're on the highway that quick. Your commute's like this. But I think if you have that housing group, there's going to be, how do we market to existing residents? There's an opportunity for a move up. And then what house can we predict is going to be available? And then how do we promote that?
I'll tell you,
kind of that whole
I love
circle of
that
housing.
project.
Yeah.
We just have a problem with acquiring the land.
Yeah.
So
You-
we have the
You're good
vast
ways
You have
majority
some of
the
it.
land.
Yeah.
Huh?
You're good ways into it, though, aren't you?
We have about 75 acres, about 200.
Okay.
The frontage part off of 30 is the problem, and it's
We don't
dragging
have
on.
access to 30.
Okay.
So yeah, no, it's a great opportunity, and I love the opportunity. I've been on board with him from day one on this
Yeah.
thing, but now it's a matter of acquiring the land, and that's not been very easy.
Without going into details, we missed the one that was gonna give us Highway 30 access? You don't have to go into details,
No,
just we
they're-
missed it, or
they're
in negotiations
in
still? maybe. Okay,
negotiations.
okay.
We just can't seem to get him to come to the table and give us a firm offer.
Let Mark and I go, we'll take care of it.
I'm about ready to send John.
You might as well.
Mark's brother.
So just out of curiosity, Mr. Pike, since you're here, I guess, do you live in Mount Vernon?
No,
Where do you live? Just
I
out
live
of,
in Franklin County.
so you're in the county. You don't necessarily care to live in town then, you're,
I would prefer to live in town. I've got a half-a-mile driveway one way, 90% of it's underwater,
Mm.
but there's nowhere to move here.
that's what my question is. So you're a city employee that would want to live here in town if you could.
Absolutely.
So, Mr. Whitehurst, since you're here, and by the way,
Remember we talked
I
about
don't
that
mean to
survey,
call
the
you,
employer
you know,
survey?
well, I'm, you know.
We're closing
doing it right
deals.
now.
We're closing deals here. If you can put
No,
$500 down today.
Well, what I'm verifying is like our teacher situation. Mr. Whitehurst, I wanted to tell you too, by the way, he runs, or operates our wastewater district.
Okay.
And let me just tell you, I went on a tour of that thing, and you all need to do this. That thing is night and day. It's awesome, and his enthusiasm is infectious, isn't it? I really think that you're awesome, dude. I really enjoyed meeting you the other day. Do you live in town?
No, sir.
Where do you live?
I live in Wood County. I live in a little community called Perryville, right outside of Winsboro.
Would you want to live here? Or
No, because I have built my forever home where
I got you.
and my wife works in Mineola, so I don't,
Yeah,
the commute's about the same for both of us. It's
Yeah,
opposite direction,
I get it.
so.
Well, that's kind of what we got on a teacher survey,
Yeah.
too, an informal survey.
Mhm.
But a lot of people, a lot of the teachers would live here, or their husbands lived here, worked here, and they worked here, and they just met in the middle.
You're kind of a more on the spot guy than you are informal.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway,
And you know, if that was available here, when they were making that original decision to move where they moved, they might have a
May
little
have-
bit different job situation too.
we
that
have a
also could play into
Starbucks
it.
now, by the way.
I know.
So I mean, shoot, that ought to draw some people. No, I just want the engine. I want the engine to go, to start.
Yeah.
I'm tired of talking about it.
Yeah.
And I've seen surveys. I've got a good friend of mine that's president and CEO of Guillen Homes. You're familiar with Guillen? And I've asked him, I said, hey, come out here and find some place to build. Well, you know, he does 250, 500 homes.
Yep.
So this is not, and the labor and the, you know, how you put something like that together. So he said, I'd love to invest in a project like that if you can put a project like that together, but I can't do it through Guillen. So I just wonder how we get the motor started.
I think this is the first process.
I guess we've done one of these before.
We didn't have crazy.
Well, that's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, I will tell you,
You talking about the countywide
That's
one?
true. Was that a countywide one?
No, it was an industrial foundation funded one.
Yeah, and how long ago was that? That was
40
80 or 90, 90 something.
I think so.
Yeah.
Things have changed, yeah.
yes, sir.
And looking at the housing demand page,
Yes, sir.
am I reading this right, that like in a price range of 300 to 450,000?
Am I going the right way?
See the demand for roughly four
Yeah.
houses per year.
Hang on. I think I was going the wrong way.
No, you're good. The 350 to 450, yeah, yeah.
So, the demand of, 18 homes a year under 200,000, probably can't be built.
Right, that's
So our demand-
unlikely to be built, yeah.
Could that be built
So-
in the form of duplexes?
Yeah, I mean, you could
Where's the
you could
demand?
probably get below that, but yeah, single family detached, like with your own lot.
I'm
it'd
just,
be tough-
I
it'd be
know it
tough,
wasn't on
yeah.
there, I was just. gonna
Right,
ask
yeah,
the
yeah,
question.
yeah, you could. And you know that I forget the gentleman's name with the 136 units to the south,
Miller
but
Street.
That Miller Street development, I think is going to be kind of in that range. Yeah.
And we're essentially guesstimating that the demand would be simply based off of population growth and income. Whereas obviously, sure, we could say we could build an apartment for that price and that would provide housing, but there wouldn't be demand in the sense that there
Yeah,
may
so
not
this-
be a high interest in that.
Right. So this
Right,
looks at
so
yeah.
We're kind of guesstimating, we don't really know the marketability of what that would be, having a $250,000 duplex. But we're just saying based on population growth and what that percentage of the population would afford.
Yes.
That's how it would fall in.
Yeah, so it's a little deeper than that, but yes, generally, and it's not simply just multiplying, 20% of the population makes this much, and 20% wants to, 50% of the population makes 50,000, right? And 50% of the population wants to be owners. It's not multiplying that to say 25% make this much and want to be owners. It's what they call micro data. It's a little more specific that kind of aligns individual people anonymously that respond to the census. That this guy has this much. He wants to be a renter. He wants to do this, and he makes this much money.
So it seems like we're seeing the data and it's not exactly like, okay, boom, now we're off and running. But I mean, the data presents problems, right, in some respects.
Which would be what?
Well, like I've been present for some meetings with landowners and home builders, and they're doing their own version of this. They're not
Sure,
necessarily asking for this, but they're comfortable with how they collect their own data. They're going to Google, they're
Sure.
looking at growth rates, they're looking at income rates, and then they're looking at what it costs them to build a house, right? So regardless of what I put in their hands, they have their own guide and their own figures, right, where they're determining how many people they think are actually going to be in the market to buy homes based on their analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll look at some of these places and they'll say, based on your average per capita income, the salaries of teachers, the salaries of the people that work at Lowe's distribution center, your biggest employers, and then your average, median home income, like you need to be at $280,000 homes. And that's kind of what your data is showing. And they're like, we can't build 180,000. Like maybe DR Horton could come in here and get close,
Mm-hmm.
but they've got their
Volume.
own projects, you don't solicit them so much as they have all their own analysis and go on their own, but so here we've got, $450,000 homes, 2 a year. And those people go and build their own.
Maybe.
We don't need
But-
to, we don't need to figure out how to,
They do right now because there's nothing available, yeah.
but in an area like this where land is fairly affordable, that's part of sure, they would take a nice home in town possibly too, but they have a lot of flexibility, just going 1 mile north and building a pond with it.
Are you suggesting?
Yeah, but some people
Are you
don't. I mean,
suggesting that
there's-
like the $350,000 and up homes won't be built in the city? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I'm saying that there's a challenge because based on the data here, we can only support 4 of those a year. There's not enough expected growth within
At
those.
this point in time.
Within those salary ranges.
And I think the other thing with that too is nobody's going to come and buy and build 2 houses at $450,000 and 4. They're going to do it in aggregate, right? You've got to have economies of scale, so they're not going to say we're going to build 4 this year and then 4, but they will say, okay, in 3 years I'll build 12. They need to see there's a market demand. Where we are right now is I don't think anybody's knocking on your door saying, hey, help me find property because we want to build these houses. So I think you have talked, as you've mentioned for years, about we need housing, we need housing, we need housing. Nobody's showing up, so you have to have data that speaks to the housing community and shows what the demand is. And it's not going to be exactly 18 units of this and 11 of that, but you've got to get in front of enough people where like, okay, this makes sense. I see that there's a market demand for this level of house. I can't build a house this cheap. I can build one like this, and then the city's going to have to say, look, we've got to build something in this price range for our community. In exchange for that, maybe we can do something that makes it easier for you to build these more expensive houses. But I think you have to have something. Nobody's showing up to build. And you've got to have a marketing piece that shows there is a demand, and we know what the demand is. We know why the demand is here. You got to get out and get in front of folks and start showing them the plan. And realizing it's not going to be this. It's going to be some semblance of these numbers.
So there's a piece of property a mile north of here, just a mile north of the square where we're at right here,
Okay.
that has like 170 lots already plotted out, the power, the road.
Yeah, there's other issues with that too, apparently, from what I understand, right?
Some of the builders that have sat down and looked at it are wanting to build $350,000 homes. But they don't see the data that supports them going in on something like that. And like if I showed them this, they'd say, well, you're showing me that we can do 4 a year.
Well,
And they say,
I'm not
based on your
familiar.
incomes, they're saying that's what scares us.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the data and it's calling for homes less than $200,000.
Yeah, and okay, so to be clear, this is all demand going forward. This is not talking about, teachers that don't live in town that want to be here, or people that would move here if that was available.
I'm not
Then I think that
criticizing you.
no, I know
The data's the data.
they're good questions, but
Looking at it, like,
sure,
we could build $140,000 homes.
yeah,
Sell
and
them for 180.
so I think that.
Turning them out.
I think that housing in general, it can't be kind of your first economic development. You can't lead with housing, right? You can't lead with housing and hope everybody else comes. You've got to lead with all your economic development efforts that raise incomes, that increase economic activity, that bring employers that have high-paying jobs, increase activity in your downtown. I think everything to do with housing housing is kind of secondary to all your economic development efforts. Yeah, it's the chicken or the egg kind of thing.
Yeah. And I will tell you the hallmark of a great community is it's safe, you have good public safety, and you have good schools. Having different housing types attracts teachers, firefighters, police officers, and if you have the kind of community that can recruit that type of employee, it makes everything else better. It makes all the other things fit. If you don't get that right, you're going to have a problem. If people don't feel safe, or this isn't a place where they want to raise their kids or have their kids educated, you're going to have a problem. So you got to figure out some of the different levels.
I think we have the demand for people wanting to be.
Yeah.
Oh, I do. Look
Yeah.
at the houses we built back over there behind the barbecue place.
Yeah,
I mean, they sold as fast as they were built.
yeah.
Back when we could build them a little more affordable.
Well, that was 2020, 2021, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of that started in 15, 16, 17, like some of the earlier.
Well, some of the early ones, but when it really hit.
There were
I
a
mean,
few houses over there. Most of them were 2021
Really?
and after.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they
I was
went,
here.
and there's still a couple, the last two lots, I think, just got houses put on them. So, I mean,
Those were, what was the price range?
150, 200, closer all of them to 200.
190s.
And that's what some of those developers, and I don't know much about it, I just sat in a few of the meetings, that's, they want to be, they wish they could be in that range, they feel like that we could really support that. You know, we could, sell 30 of them a year.
I mean, I think that's what we're trying to do, so.
Yeah, and it's very difficult to quantify the people like John and Mark that, may live in the Metroplex right now, but they hear about Mount Vernon, they hear what's going on, they're looking for, a place to get away from the rat race kind of thing, but there's nothing available, so it's very hard to understand like how many of those people are out there. Anecdotally, from talking to you and talking to a few other people, it seems like there's, whether it's Mount Vernon or whether it's another place in East Texas, there is the desire to move to these places that are have amenities,
Let's go
have
form the field
good
of
school
dreams.
districts.
Yeah, I will tell you, within 6 months of us moving here, 2 other families from our school in Frisco moved here. That were friends of our daughters, that were, it kind of felt the same way. And all of a sudden, it's like,
Medium to higher incomes.
yeah,
They'll come and they won't have many options.
and the other thing that's improving in this region is medical. Christus is building a 75,000 square foot hospital just down the road in Mount Pleasant. So one of the things before, when you talk to folks about moving out here, is they loved it until they got a health problem. They said, we've got to move back to the Metroplex because there's no health care. Well, that's changing. And I think you'll see I don't think that's going to be the last thing that happens. I think you're going to see more of a movement for medical out in this area.
You see that,
And that's the first big investment.
You see that in Lufkin, Nacogdoches area too. I mean, that's a huge spot for people that have moved away from Houston. Now that there's a bunch of medical there.
You gotta go back to Dallas?
Yeah, unfortunately.
What else?
Well, Fort Worth. I'm not a Dallas guy. I'm a Fort Worth guy.
You get Fort Worth guy? That's where I
Yeah,
just
I
came
wear
from.
socks. So.
Nice.
So, does anybody else have anything? Mr. Hostetler? Ma'am?
I'm just curious, and you may not have the answer to this, but like, where are these $450,000 houses in the city? Where are they now? Do we have any?
I don't think we
Go
have
ask
any.
the tax
But I'm saying,
appraiser.
like, so, yeah,
Other than Mark's house, that's the only one I know.
but I mean, like, you're thinking putting them in, not like tearing houses down and building them.
I see
No.
those as part of the overall master plan for the traditional neighborhood
I
development.
mean, it's a big.
Yeah, because if you're gonna build a house like that, you're not gonna put it out in the middle of the field, okay? Or, what I'm saying is you're not gonna group a bunch of them out there with just, with
By
just no
themselves.
amenities.
Right, I'm just thinking a lot
In
of
the
people
city-
that have that size house would maybe want not neighbors, right?
Maybe.
Well,
That's kind of.
maybe and maybe not, I
Most people
mean,
that come out here, I mean.
I'll tell you, when we built ours downtown because we had kids going to school, going to church. And so it's in a neighborhood that probably, I don't know if anybody else would do it.
Yeah.
But I think that's what you're saying. There's purposeful
Yeah.
people that do it.
yeah,
Now we're down to one kid. We're probably gonna sell that house soon and
not everybody that wants $450,000 house wants a 10 acres with it.
Right, okay.
They want a nice lot that they could walk and get a cup of coffee, or they could walk their kids to school, so on and so forth. They can drive a golf cart through the neighborhood, those types of amenities.
I think the point is that like those people are kind of forced into the county because there's no options, and maybe some of them want to live in town. Maybe maybe some want to stay out there, but until that's available, how do you really know that?
And it's also important to build a kind of a village. You know, if you look at what makes communities really, really work, there was a guy that I studied under. He built this development in McKinney called Adriatica, and for the life of me, I couldn't figure it out. There was a Kroger and just a strip center. Then he builds this Croatian village. Have you seen it? I'm like, what in the world is going on? And I'm fascinated, and I went and met the guy and just spent a day with him. And he went to Croatia and studied how they lived. And he sat outside on this bench and just watched everybody come to work. And he said there was like a floor shop and a tailor and whatever, and all these restaurants and medical, doctor's offices or whatever in this area. And he would just sit and watch people. Where did they park? Did they walk in? And he was just trying to study people. And he said, well, when people came into the floral shop, if there was trash outside, they always picked it up. And he says, well, that's because they're florists and they make beauty. But then he also noticed that people that went into the tailor shop, they were picking it up. And there was people at the restaurant, and some picked it up and some didn't. And he was just fascinated about what makes people pick trash up and what makes people not. And he just started talking with folks, and he found out the floral shop owner lived in that village, but all of her workers did too. And the tailor lived there, and all of his workers did. The owner of the restaurant lived there. Some of his workers did. Some of them didn't, and they lived somewhere else. And those are the ones that walk by the trash. It's not theirs. They don't live here. And he said the secret to community is building a village where the owner of the business can live there and the workers can live there. And if you think about something like this, a superintendent of a school district would probably live in a different house than the custodian at the school district. But if they all live in the same place, they own it. It's theirs, and that's what makes community. That's when you start seeing all those little things you can't really measure, like cleanliness, and everybody keeps their yard up, and things are just a certain way. You don't have domestic issues with neighbors because we live here and we work here. And if you can create a situation where the top people in the community can live there and the lowest level person can live in the same place, that's when magic happens. And I think you have an opportunity. You look at there's demands for really nice houses, and there's demands for entry-level houses. And I suggest with some of the property the Industrial Development Corporation has acquired, I think there's an opportunity to have kind of a mixed-use village.
Another point of clarification on this chart here is that annual employment induced demand is kind of a distilled version. So there's a lot of that 250 to 450 because of the price range of those jobs that's included in that 22 unit number. But when we get back to like this traditional neighborhood development concept that the city's working on these are mixed price range housing, right? There may be mixed types too. I mean, there may be townhomes, there may be duplexes, there may be single-family detached, there may be garden homes or patio homes. It's a wide range. It's not just one price point or nothing. It's a blend of all of that, and I think that's what makes that work because it blends together people of all, like John was saying, people of all different income levels that can live in the same area.
You ready?
No, I'm ready. Whenever you are.
All right. Do I have to do a formal?
Yeah.
I am looking for a motion to adjourn because we have city workers and people like that are Democrats that only work half days and no days and all that, so need to let them get home. Yeah. Anyway, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Second. Thank you. We are adjourned.